now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. Before I take Alphacore to the barbecue, I wanted to give everybody a progress report on the SJS Direct 2024 catalog. Now, all of the books of the SJS Direct 2024 catalog are done and are uploaded to KDP, and I've got the cover for John Haynes' Illuminati from Mike Williams, and I'm waiting for Bill Walker to give me the covers for Isis, Dark Incubus, and Esteem Horror in the Hamptons, and after I get those covers, everything will be ready for the 2024 catalog. And I've got the scripts for All That Glitters and the script for the Beauty Myth in their drafts, and I'm still working on them, and I'm still trying to find ways to get the sequences to flow, so I'm still out here looking to get stuff done as related to getting the next SJS Direct comic out there. And if you guys could drop donations, that'll help me to be able to start looking to further secure the budget for the next SJS Direct comic. Right now, I've got about 25% of the funds saved up for the next SJS Direct comic, and every donation will help me get that much further. Now, with that said, I'm going to go into this barbecuing of this Rippaverse comic, Alphacore, and how this whole comic is building on the rickety foundation of the Rippaverse. Now, in a previous video, I said that Eric July was the Tyler Perry of comics, and like Tyler Perry, he's a guy who comes out here on feelings without knowing anything about craft or technique. Now, Tyler Perry is known in black circles of Hollywood as a filmmaker for some reason. However, if you look at much of his work, it's not really of high quality because Tyler Perry doesn't really care about looking to improve in his craft and doesn't want to go out here and learn the basic techniques of filmmaking. And it's really sad because after 20 years, he's gone out here making mistake after mistake, and sadly, he gets encouraged to do this by white leftists in Hollywood and a core base of black women who will just basically buy anything from Tyler Perry without ever demanding a higher level of quality. And the same thing happens here with Eric July as related to his Rippaverse line of comics, a line of comics that he believes will help him win. But whenever I look at anything as related to a Rippaverse comic, I basically see how the audience is losing as they're getting ripped off by this guy who has the same level of talent as Tyler Perry and has the same attitude of Tyler Perry in not looking to go out here and improve in his craft or learn anything about technique as related to his craft. Because his first 2 issues of Isom were just hot garbage, having no real story and no real story structure, and does not really establish a foundation for the Rippaverse for building any sort of structures on it. Now, if you look at Marvel Comics back in the 1960s, the entire universe is built on 2 characters, Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. And I know some of these racists out here are going to say, oh, the Fantastic Four isn't just one character. No, but as a book, both of those books lay the foundation for the Marvel Age of Comics. And you have Eric July saying that there's no one character that lays the foundation for the Rippaverse, and that's a major problem as related to structuring an entire world. No, you need to have lead characters be the foundation for your world, or you're not going to be able to build any sort of structures on that world for other characters to be a part of it. That's why Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four were important for Marvel, and that's why Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman were important for DC, because just like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the DC Trinity, they laid the foundation for the building of the world, and each of those lead characters are the ones that are used to further build the world out. And this is something that I learned from reading thousands of comics and books like Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee and Son of Origins by Stan Lee, that when I was building the SJS Direct Universe, and that you need lead characters to lead the entire world. And that's where I started with John Haynes and Isis, making them lead characters, and having Esteem being a branch out character, and then further branching out to other characters like Lilith Graves, who was featured in the Eternal Night novel. And you need those lead characters to lay the foundation because they build up the world. But Eric July believes you can just have a world with no lead character, and that's why we get these spin-off books like Alphacore, which are built on a rickety foundation. And as they're built on a rickety foundation, they really don't do a good job of further expanding the world of this Rippaverse. And when I look at this Rippaverse, it's really reminded me a lot of the early days of Image Comics, where in the early days of Image Comics, everybody was caught up in their emotions about Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane opening up their own company. Unfortunately, a lot of their product wasn't very good coming out, and over the course of a couple of years, what happened was Image, this quality started to fall off because they didn't have that whole foundation of creators that understood how to go out and build anything on quality. No, you can only make so many Wolverine and X-Men knockoffs before you start running out of story. And with the Rippaverse, I'm looking at Alphacore, and while Eric July has gone out here and recruited Chuck Dixon to write this comic, unfortunately, this comic basically has real issues because it's built on a rickety foundation and does not have the structures to further develop these characters to have the depth that they need in order to be a part of a larger world. Now, the Alphacore is supposed to be Flora Sparks' police department as related to dealing with Accepts. Unfortunately, this group of Accept officers really don't have enough story to work with as related to the really weak concept. And that's the big problem with Alphacore, is that the concept needed a bit more development before it went to print. It really needed a lot more as related to developing these characters, personalities, and voices, and that's where Eric July is the Tyler Perry of comics. Yes, he recruited Chuck Dixon to go out here and write Alphacore, but with Chuck Dixon writing Alphacore, it reminds me of the Medea movie Diary of a Mad Black Woman, which was directed by Darren Grant, as was one of the better Tyler Perry movies, and is way better than his other movies like Medea Goes to Jail. But it's still a Tyler Perry styled comic in that the foundations and the structure of the story are just not developed enough to really make a very compelling comic that makes you say you want to go out here and buy it next time when you see the second issue. Now, this first issue was passable as related to story, and is a lot better than Isom, which was just a complete mess. I mean, there is a bit of a structure to this story in the beginning as related to the opening. I mean, you get, at least you do get a splash page with a character who is a villain, and that really gets your attention for a minute. So it opens up and shows us the bad guy, which starts the conflict, and shows us a character that is interesting, but it just isn't enough to make you say, why should we care? Yeah, we get a lot of cops out here as related to this hostage situation outside the Texas Trust at Florist Park, and then we get an introduction to the Officer Brian Solari, who grabs this guy who has a bomb and tells him that as he's getting shot, oh, he'll live, but it still hurts. And this is a homage to Superman #1's cover, but the whole thing is it's here, it's nice, but it's just not enough to make it interesting. Now, as this goes on, the Brian Solari takes the bomb vest off the guy, throws him into a pool, and that gets your attention. And as it gets your attention for a minute, the story starts to open up with him coming in and interfering in what is supposed to be not his affairs, because according to Eric July, the Alphacore are only supposed to deal with except they are dealing with this situation. And this is supposed to be the start of the story, but it doesn't really answer a question about the Alphacore, and that is, why should I care about the Alphacore? I mean, if the crime in Florist Park is not that bad, why is this guy here? And it looks like to me that he's one of these kind of guys who just doesn't really follow the rules. So that's supposed to be his story, but later on in the book, they show him being this guy who looks to obey commands. So there's not really much consistency with the characters, and even less consistency with the villains of this story. Now, a major issue I have with this book is the villains of this story, who are coming across as complete weak sauce. I mean, the villains of this story basically are some of the weakest villains I've seen. I mean, we've got these villains who are supposed to be out here as some sort of threat, but I don't really see how they are a threat in proportion to the scale of the Alphacore. Now, after Solari deals with this guy with the bomb, he then flies over to the base in the air, and as he's in the base in the air, which they are going to call the air, which is the Eagle's Nest, we get him going to the base, and that's where we meet Ingrid Valdez, who is supposed to be the Wonder Woman of the group. And we get introduced to this lawyer, and I'm wondering what happened to Braxwell. I mean, Braxwell is supposed to be the black guy of this book, and with Braxwell, I'm starting to notice a bit of a pattern as related to black characters in the Rippaverse, and that pattern of black characters in the Rippaverse is that they're pushed to the background and the white characters are pushed to the foreground. And that's quite troubling when you consider Eric July is supposed to be a black creator, and this black creator doesn't go out here and make an effort to put a person who looks like him to the forefront of the story. That really is a bit of a problem. But this is par for the course for a guy who takes pictures with Kyle Rittenhouse proudly, that he basically looking to bootlick to these white people on the far right, and is looking to go out here and get those white far right dollars and minimize his own blackness, not understanding that the system of white supremacy does not go out here and look to give bootlicks a retirement plan. Now, as this story goes on, it just becomes one big police story, which is supposed to be something like NYPD Blue, but it doesn't really have a solid focus. I mean, yes, we get to know the Alphacore. We know that they have somewhat of a mission, but the whole thing is that the characters are in a world where many of the characters are just underdeveloped. And that's a big problem with the Alphacore, is that the characters really don't have much depth or layers, and we really don't get much psychology as related to many of the characters. They just come across as a bit two-dimensional. I mean, many of the characters in the Alphacore, they really don't really have strong personalities or voices. And yeah, Chuck Dixon, he's really lost a step here. But the reason why I believe he lost a step is because he's trying to follow the lead of Eric July, who really didn't take the time to develop this Alphacore concept, because I don't really like Isom. It really doesn't know whether it wants to be a comic about cops or whether it wants to be a comic about superheroes. It really doesn't have that focus as related to what direction it wants to go in. And that really makes for a book that is a bit of a struggle to get through. And it's a book that doesn't really engage you to the point where you just get excited about it. No, this is a book that has some interesting ideas, but really needs to be fleshed out a bit more as related to concept, because when you're doing a comic, you have to have everything truly clear. You have to have the lead character. You have to establish what they want and why should we care. And as you're doing that first issue, you need to have that character's mission established, and you need to have a goal for the characters to be able to accomplish. And this book basically, again, it has good ideas, but it doesn't have a real focus. Again, does it want to be a comic about cops, or does it want to be a superhero comic? Does it want to be a mystery? This is where I have problems with this book, and that it doesn't have a clear focus, and that lack of focus is the problem with Alphacore that makes it a book that is hard to get into. And as the book goes on, we find out that the big payoff really doesn't pay off. Everything is revolving around this bank and the safe deposit box, but the whole setup to that whole situation turns into a USB key that's supposed to load a virus onto the computers of the heir, and that leads into a climax that really doesn't pay off, and leads to a conclusion that, like Isom, doesn't really have a solid ending that ends in an organic conclusion. So I'm noticing a pattern with these Rippaverse comics in that the storytelling isn't very well structured, and I'm also noticing a pattern as related to these books, basically just not knowing how to end a story. Like Tyler Perry or Ed Wood before him, these stories are just here for the sake of being here and come across more as emotional writing rather than actual storytelling. And if you're a writer, you know that there's a difference between emotional writing and actual storytelling. Emotional writing is something done out of feelings, and yes, while it will sate your feelings, what will happen is it doesn't make much sense as related to the overall story, and the audience doesn't really know what's really going on. Whereas a story that's properly structured, you get a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's what good storytelling does. It gives you a beginning, a middle, and an end. But with Rippaverse books, you get a story that just stops at the last page, but no real organic conclusion. And again, for an 80-plus page book, which is the equivalent of 3 issues or a whole story arc, this book should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have an actual conclusion that leads to a beginning of another story. But we don't get that here. No, we get a lot of ideas that really have not been fully developed, and we get a lot of ideas that are not really brought together to come to a cohesive story. No, we get feelings as related to a story of the Alphacore, but we don't see why they are really essential to this world. We see, they're supposed to protect people from exceps, but except we don't really get much of a story here. Just characters who show up and stuff happens, but no real reason to get excited about it. It's just like one big meh of a book, in that if you saw it at a store, you would look at it and go, the art looks okay, but the whole book doesn't make you go, oh, I gotta go get the next issue. It's, oh, if I get this, it'll be nice, but now that I've got it, I can really pass on it. And it just really doesn't come together to become that book like Amazing Fantasy 15 or Fantastic Four #1, where you're saying, oh, I gotta get this book. This is the start of a great new world. This is the start of meh. And the entire third act of this comic basically falls completely apart. I mean, once they get the USB key, I'm sitting there shaking my head about this entire plot, because this whole plot with the USB key, I would think that their technicians would have had enough brains to say, no, we're not going to plug the key into our computers. No, we'll take it and put it in one of these laptops to find out what's on it. Then after we put it on the laptop, we find out what's on there. But this whole book just, again, crumbles apart, and it falls apart because Eric July didn't take the time to craft antagonists that are exciting or a formidable threat. I mean, yeah, he's trying to say that these corporate guys are a bit smarter than the Alphacore, but they don't really feel like a credible threat whatsoever. And that's what makes the entire third act of this book crumble into dust, and basically makes the entire story fall completely apart, because as this book hits the third act, we find out that the entire plot is just a mess. Because if this is all about a USB key, it's just absolutely ridiculous, and just shows how bad the writing for this book is. Again, reminding me a lot of Tyler Perry, who would go out here and build up his story in the beginning, showing us, oh, this black woman who's being abused by this super black brute, but the whole story starts to fall apart because the characters have no layers, have no depth, have no psychology, and yes, that makes the black women feel good when they watch Tyler Perry movies, but everybody else who looks at it from the perspective of being a craftsperson of cinema can see that story that Tyler Perry is presenting just makes no sense. But yeah, Tyler Perry makes a lot of money off black women, and Eric July makes a lot of money on the far right. But as you read his books, you'll start to see that there is a problem with the Rippaverse, and the problem is that the Rippaverse is not built on a strong foundation as related to building a world, and with it being built on a weak foundation, it's just not, I don't see it lasting much longer than a couple of years at best, and will be falling into the annals of defunct comic companies like First and Now and Comico, which made way better comics than this. Because if this is the level of quality, I don't see how the comic book industry would win with the Rippaverse trying to overtake Marvel and DC. Now, Marvel and DC make hot garbage these days, but the Rippaverse line of comics is not going to be this grand savior that people believe it's going to be. No, I don't see the Rippaverse being the grand savior of comics. No, I see it basically being a flash in the pan, like many other small independent comics came out in the 90s, and it has a lot of hype in the beginning, but when it's time to go out here and put together the quality work and put the substance to the stories, I don't think that Eric July has those skills as related to craft, and I don't think Chuck Dixon can help him here. Now, Chuck Dixon is a legendary comic writer, but he can only work with what he's got, and what he's got here is based on Flash, but doesn't have much substance as related to story. And if you don't have substance, you're not going to be able to answer that critical question that a writer like myself has to answer, which is, why should we care? And it's going to be hard to get people to care if he continues to make poor quality comics like this. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is now available on Lulu.com, and you can pick up a paperback copy for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for 99 cents, And if you want to get a paper copy of that book, you can get it in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. And if you want to check out all of the books of the SJS Direct universe, you can find all of those books in the Isis series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy and my vampire novel Eternal Night. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find all of those books at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu. John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at lulu.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.